The air hung heavy, thick with the smell of approaching rain. Sarah hummed softly, a familiar tune to soothe her nerves. She always felt uneasy when a storm was coming, especially tonight. Tonight she needed light, the comforting glow of electricity against the encroaching darkness. Sarah glanced at the clock, its digital numbers glowing a reassuring green 10:34 p.m. Just a few more hours until dawn. She continued her nightly ritual, checking each lock twice, securing every window. Her small apartment, usually a haven of peace, felt different tonight. It felt vulnerable. She moved from room to room, her bare feet padding softly on the hardwood floor. Each light clicked on, pushing back the shadows that seemed to press against the windows. The wind howled outside, a low, mournful sound that sent shivers down her spine. It was going to be a long night. The first gust of wind rattled the windows, the sound like fingernails scraping against glass. Sarah jumped, her heart pounding in her chest. She chided herself for being silly. It was just the wind. It was always windy before a storm. But deep down, a primal fear stirred within her. She hated the dark, always had. It held 1,000 unseen terrors lurking just beyond the reach of her sight. As a child, she imagined monsters hiding under her bed, their glowing eyes watching her every move. Now, as an adult, she knew better. And yet, the fear remained, an unwelcome companion in the night. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She needed to relax. It was just a storm. She had weathered many storms before. Focusing on her breath, she continued her nightly routine, this time turning on every lamp, every string of fairy lights, bathing her apartment in a warm, reassuring glow. The storm broke with a deafening roar. Rain lashed against the windows, the wind howling like a banshee. Thunder shook the building, the sound vibrating through her very bones. Suddenly the lights flickered, once, twice, then plunged her apartment into darkness. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Silence descended, heavy and absolute, broken only by the pounding of her own heart. The storm raged outside, a symphony of chaos, but inside there was only an unnerving stillness. Sarah stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. The darkness seemed to press in on her, suffocating, consuming. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling. No signal, of course. Why would there be a signal in a power outage? She was trapped, alone in the suffocating darkness with her fear. The silence was almost unbearable. It wasn't a peaceful silence, but a heavy, expectant one, filled with unseen possibilities. Sarah strained her ears, listening for any sound, any sign of life beyond the storm's fury. But there was nothing, only the incessant drumming of rain against the windows and the frantic beating of her own heart. She told herself it was just a power outage, it would be back on soon. But the rational part of her brain was losing ground to the rising tide of fear. The darkness was alive, she could feel it, pressing against her, seeping into her pores, filling her lungs with its icy dread. She forced herself to move, to break free from the paralysis that threatened to consume her. She needed light, any light. Groping blindly in the darkness, she made her way to the kitchen, her hands trailing along the wall for guidance. Section 5. Whispers in the Dark. The familiar layout of her apartment had become a treacherous maze in the darkness. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind against the window pane sent shivers down her spine. She stumbled over an unseen object, her heart leaping into her throat. A choked sob escaped her lips, and then she heard it. A whisper, soft and indistinct, carried on the wind. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Her blood ran cold. She stopped dead in her tracks, her breath held hostage in her chest. Was it her imagination, a trick of the wind, or something more sinister? She listened intently, every nerve ending on high alert. The whisper came again, closer this time, a breath of air against her ear. It sent a chill down her spine, raising goosebumps on her arms. It was not a language she recognized, but the tone was unmistakable. Dark, menacing, hungry. Section 6. A Glimmer of Hope. Her fingers finally brushed against the cool metal of her emergency kit. Relief, sweet and fleeting, washed over her. She fumbled with the latch, her fingers clumsy with fear. The kit clattered open, spilling its contents onto the floor. She ignored the flashlight, reaching instead for the familiar comfort of a candle and matches. The first strike of the match flared, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. The tiny flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. It wasn't much, but it was enough to push back the darkness, to give her a small measure of control. She lit the candle, its warm glow a comforting presence in the oppressive darkness. Holding the candle aloft, she made her way back to the living room, her shadow stretching out before her, a distorted reflection of her own fear. She needed to get out of this apartment. She needed to be somewhere safe, somewhere with light and people. Section 7. The Entity's Presence. As she passed the darkened hallway, a cold spot settled over her. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. The candle flame flickered violently, casting grotesque shapes on the walls. Fear tightened its grip, squeezing the air from her lungs. She wanted to run, to scream, but stood frozen. Her legs felt like lead, her voice trapped. An invisible force held her captive, its icy fingers around her heart. The whispering started again, closer now, taunting her. Sarah's grip on the candle tightened, her knuckles turning white. She tried to rationalize her fear. It was just the wind, just her imagination. But deep down, she knew the truth. Something was here with her in the darkness. The whispering intensified, morphing into a low growl that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. The candle flame sputtered, threatening to extinguish itself and plunge her back into the abyss. Panic surged through her, hot and suffocating. She had to get out. Now. She took a step back, then another, her eyes darting around the room, searching for the source of the growl, the unseen entity that held her captive in its thrall. But the darkness offered no answers, only a deepening sense of dread. The air crackled with unseen energy, pressing in on her, stealing her breath. The growl intensified, becoming a guttural snarl that reverberated through the room. It was close now, too close. She could feel its icy breath on her skin, smell the stench of decay and rot that clung to it like a shroud. Her mind screamed at her to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there like a deer caught in headlights. The candle flame dwindled, its light a fragile defense against the encroaching darkness. Sarah's hand trembled, the wax dripping onto her fingers, burning hot. She barely noticed the pain. All she could focus on was the entity, its presence looming over her, its power palpable in the oppressive air. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that she couldn't escape. This thing, whatever it was, had been drawn to her fear, feeding off it, growing stronger with every panicked beat of her heart. It had chosen her, and there was nowhere left to run. The growl reached a deafening crescendo, vibrating through her, shaking her to her very core, and then silence. Absolute, consuming silence. The candle flame flickered one last time, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the walls, before surrendering to the darkness. Sarah was left in absolute blackness, alone with the entity. The darkness was complete now, impenetrable, suffocating. Sarah couldn't see her hand in front of her face, couldn't even make out the faintest outline of the furniture around her. It was as if the darkness itself had become a living, breathing entity, wrapping its cold, clammy fingers around her throat, squeezing the air from her lungs. She sank to her knees, her back against the cold wall, her chest heaving with terror. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. She was utterly alone, trapped in the suffocating blackness with whatever malevolent force had chosen her for its own. The silence was broken only by the frantic beating of her own heart, a drumbeat of fear echoing in her ears. She closed her eyes, squeezing them shut as if trying to block out the darkness, the terror, the overwhelming feeling of dread that threatened to consume her whole. But there was no escaping it. It was everywhere, inside her, around her, a suffocating, all-encompassing void. Then she felt it. A cold hand, clammy and skeletal, closed around her wrist. The touch sent a jolt of pure terror through her. She tried to pull away, but the grip was too strong. Something was dragging her back into the impenetrable darkness. The entity was relentless, pulling her deeper into the abyss. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the air, closer now. She went limp, her body racked with tremors. The darkness had won,